Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest Martha Glory Kartaoui. Martha is an author, speaker, mentor, life visionary, host of the Let Glory Shine TV show, and a trauma-informed event facilitator and coach. And with that, Martha, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. I've been looking forward to our conversation for some time now.
Thank you, Dave, for having me. It's a pleasure to get to speak with you again. It's always a joy. So thank you for sharing your platform.
You're welcome, man. I was on your platform. I was on the Let Glory Shine TV show. I had a great conversation. You just created a very welcoming platform for my story to unfold, and it was just a great experience, and I was very grateful for the invite to be a guest contributor on your TV show.
Absolutely. It was my honor.
Well, thank you. And we also got to give some shout out to John Emery. John Emery is another podcast connector. He does a great job hooking up individuals with the right podcast hosts. He got us together, and I think it was a great fit. And we find ourselves at this moment in time today.
Exactly. John's amazing, and he's done a lot of connecting, and it's fun when you're in this world of like when you hear somebody's story or you're like, oh my gosh, you would do so well with this person, or I have to introduce you to this person, and John is one of the best at that. So shout out John Emery.
Absolutely. So Martha, my first question for you was tell our audience about the experiences that have shaped your life path and your life passions today.
Whew, that's a deep question. I don't know if we have enough time for it, but I'll give you the acorn version of that question. So I grew up and was born into a religious cult, and it was in Shawnee, Wisconsin. So if you want to Google it, that's the best way to find out about it. And I was born into it. So that's all I knew. And at 26 years old, I found myself ready to escape. I had been held in the confines of that compound for 8 years. And I found my sister on the internet who had been on the outside for 6+ years. And so I found her and we started chatting, and I found out she was pregnant. And in that moment of finding out she was pregnant, something switched inside of me that said, I want to be home for this child. I want to be with my sister. So backstory, because we were in the cult, I had no relationships with my extended family. So I didn't have grandparents. I didn't have aunts and uncles. I didn't have cousins. And it was a very lonely existence. It was only me and the people from the cult. Like I didn't have like ties to my extended family. So when my sister told me she was pregnant, there was something inside of me that said, I want to be an auntie. I want to be an auntie. And I couldn't shake it. And so I told my sister, I said, I don't know how, but I am going to get home to be with you for this baby. And she was like, okay, I'll help whatever way I can, but I know where you are and I know how hard it is to get out of there, but we're just going to trust. So 10 days later, I made my escape. My escape was divine. All the pieces that needed to fall into place fell seamlessly into place. But there was a guardian angel that was helping me. His name was Papa. I had met him. He was from the outside, and I had met him at the shop that I worked at for the cult. So I worked for a cult-owned business, and this old man had befriended me. And we had known each other for about 4 years, and we had built a rapport. He was like a grandfather to me in the only sense that I knew of, a relationship like that, since I didn't have a real relationship with my birth grandparents. So he had filled this place of, built my trust. We had connected. He was the first person to ever share with me about Jesus, because in the cult, we were taught about the Old Testament God, the God that was mad at us, the God that was going to burn us with hellfire and brimstone, the God that was going to make us pay for all of our sins. That's the God that I grew up with, that fear God. I wasn't taught about the love, grace, and mercy of Jesus. So Papa had introduced me to that. And I can't say that I believed him, but I listened to him because I didn't know what it felt like to be loved. I had never been loved by anybody or anything. So how could I believe that Jesus loved me, right? So he facilitated. I finally became painfully honest with him about my past and about the things that I had survived in the cult. And he just was, of course, mind blown by anybody that hears my story, is like, how did somebody survive that, right? And that was physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, emotional. I went through all of that the first 26 years of my life. And so he was like, I know this is not God's plan for you, and I will do whatever I can to help you, but I have to wait on God's counsel. And so he started praying about it. And within 24 hours, God laid out the plan for him, and he came and shared it with me. He bought me a car. He gave me money because I'd been working for free for this shop. I'd never got paid a single cent. So he thought of all the things, because I was this naive cult girl that knew nothing about the outside world, anything about what things cost. I had no concepts. And so he helped me escape. And then I enter this world that I knew nothing about. And that was the next phase, trauma, and of having to put my life back together. And eventually that would lead me into the healing journey that I've been on for the last 14 years.
Yeah, that's quite the path that you have embarked on. And, when you mentioned not having any contact with extended family, not knowing your birth grandparents, cults do that. I mean, that's part of the abuse that they lay on their members, is that they isolate them from the outside world. They isolate them from other meaningful contacts that basically they would see as a threat to the message that they're trying to indoctrinate in you. And that's just one of the standard games that abusers play, is that type of isolation. So yeah, I can imagine when you went out in the real world and you found out that you had all this freedom, you could choose to be who you wanted to be. That had to be very overwhelming. You were brought up with a God that was the version of the Bible, the Old Testament, where there was a fearful God that you were punished for your sins. And I never thought, Martha, in my upbringing, I never saw a God that would be punishing and not forgiving our sins. I could never align with that kind of, if you don't do as I say, I'm going to banish you to the bowels of hell. I still have trouble wrapping my head around that. So, but yeah, I mean, through pure serendipity, you found Papa, and with some divine intervention and the intervention of God, got out of there. And I'm glad you did. You mentioned spiritual abuse, and what does spiritual abuse look like? What is the impact on its victims? And what is the impact similar to other kinds of abuse or different from other kinds of abuse?
So, Dave, that's actually a really great question. And I've done tons and tons of interviews, and nobody's ever asked me that one. And that's actually a really important question. So thank you for asking it. Spiritual abuse is much like other abuses, but for me and other people that have been from cults that I have spoken to, it you cannot control with love. You have to control with fear. So the spiritual abuse is always convincing you that you are not good enough, that you're falling short, and that God's mad at you, right? Like, that's the stick behind the door, that you're always trying to do better to get into the graces of God, i.e. for us, cult man, right? You have to get in the good graces of cult man because he was our intercessor. So the abuse that he used to control us was spiritual abuse first and foremost, because all of us were fighting for salvation. That was our end goal, right? Because we were taught that we were the chosen people, but the chosen people had to do X, Y, and Z in order to gain salvation. Well, X, Y, and Z kept growing, right? You always fell short. There was no way to reach that pinnacle of like, I finally did good enough to earn my salvation. It was always do more, give more money, say more prayers, pray more, get on your knees, worship. The line kept moving. The end goal kept moving, and just became more of a demand on us spiritually, when you separate yourself from that and you realize who God is and who God wants to be to us, you realize just how damning that abuse was,
Yeah.
right? Because I can separate the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, but turning God into a monster in order to control us and isolate us and brainwash us, that's a different kind of abuse.
Oh, absolutely. And the cult's version of spirituality is totally different from what I understand spirituality to be. And religion can go hand in hand, but spirituality can also be separate from religion. It's a very individualized
Yes.
process.
Yes.
There's so many different holistic schools of thought. There's so many different spiritual practices that help us find clarity. To be told that there's only one way to awareness is abuse in and of itself and is limiting. And to me, as part of that message that the cult had to ingrain is that spirituality is going to be as we define it. If you go outside to try to find other methods of spirituality, they're not valid. And that's all part of the power and control that they exert over its members.
Exactly. Exactly.
You mentioned Cult Man. Was this kind of a personification that was invented by the leaders of the cult, or was this a separate individual in the cult itself?
Okay, great question. So Cult Man is the leader, but it's the name I gave him after I escaped because I didn't want to call him by his name because I didn't want legal ramifications. I didn't want them coming after me, right? So I had to come up with a different name for him. So I call him Cult Man, and it's kind of picked up because now that I've gone public, when people from my cult referred to him, they call him Cult Man because it just turned into the name that we call him when we talk about him. So no, that was not his name within the cult because they would all argue that we weren't in a cult, right? He would never acknowledge that he is the leader of a cult. His name has changed many times over the years because he changes it every time that there's legal things coming after him. But no, that's the name that I gave him after I decided to go public because I didn't want legal ramifications.
Yeah, it makes sense. You worked hard in concert with Papa to get out of the cult. You certainly do not want to have any reasons for them to come after you legally or otherwise. So smart move.
Yeah.
Smart move. I would do the same thing. So you're a life, health, and spiritual coach specializing in trauma. What are the services, interventions you provide, and what types of trauma do your clients typically present with?
I'm a trauma-informed coach, and I also do lifestyle and health coaching as well. I have certifications in both. So generally, what people come to me with are emotional abuse, sexual abuse, domestic abuse. But abuse and trauma is trauma and abuse, right? Just because I was in a cult doesn't mean that I can't resonate or I can't understand a domestic abuse situation because pain is pain, trauma is trauma. And trauma is not the event that happened to us. Those are unfortunate circumstances. The trauma is actually the identities that we take on because of said event, right? I'm unwanted, I'm unloved, I'm unsafe, I'm abandoned. Those are the traumas. So, regardless of what you've been through, the identities are the same. So, when you come to me, we're going to identify your identities that you've picked up and taken on. And then we're going to break those down and help you to release them, step out of them, reclaim ones that you really get to choose versus the ones that you took on for protection, safety, right? All of those things. And so, regardless of what people have been through, the trauma and the identities are very similar because we all take on those same things: unloved, unwanted, abandoned, fearful, right? All of those things.
So it's kind of helping them, if I'm hearing this correctly, it's helping them reclaim their identity, taking a look at maybe parts of themselves that they can integrate with their new identity and what other parts no longer serve them.
100%. It's all about reclaiming self, right? So many people go through the majority of their life without having a relationship with themselves,
Yeah.
right? We're having all of these relationships with other people, whether it's our spouses, whether it's our children, our job. We become lawyers, doctors, accountants, singers, whatever, but have zero relationship with ourselves. So if you had to sit down and when I coach, I ask, very deep conversations like, how well do you know yourself? Let's talk about how well you know yourself. Just like if I asked you, if I was in marriage counseling and I'm asking you how well you know your spouse, right? And
Yeah.
people get really uncomfortable because they're like, I've never thought about that. And this is you. That should be your number one investment is in you. That should be your number one love is you. But it took me so long to get to this point where I understood that everything flows from my relationship to self.
Yes.
When I have a relationship, a good relationship with myself, I have a better relationship with my children. I have a better relationship with my parents, my siblings, my spouse. My relationships are better when I love Martha Glory, when I take care of Martha Glory, when I show up for Martha Glory.
Absolutely. And when you're talking individuals who have been victims of abuse, their identity is externally determined. It's determined by the abuser. You will be who I say you will be. So when they break away from that, it's like, who am I now? Away from the abuser, that my identity is no longer externally defined. Who am I now? And it also sounds like what you do is you help individuals identify those parts of themselves that no longer serve them. And it's kind of like you help them go through a symbolic death of those parts so that they can be reborn into the existence that they determine for themselves as valid.
Right. So I call that the trauma self and the healing self, right? And there really are two selves because when you understand that the trauma self and all the identities that you took on are not the healing self, right? Because in the healing self, and when you have faith, you understand that the trauma self gets to die. You don't have to carry the emotion of the trauma self for the rest of your life. There is in forgiveness, in letting go, in releasing, processing, you don't have to be connected to those events any longer, right? You can allow yourself to step fully into the presence of the healing self. Doesn't mean that you forget, doesn't mean that those things didn't happen. It just means that you can let down the backpack full of rocks of the heaviness you've carried around that event.
Yeah. And you can let it go. You can allow somebody to share the heaviness, help you reframe that heaviness, and maybe reframe heaviness into resilience.
100%. 100%.
I like that. It sounds like you have a very individualized, very dynamic program that just meets the needs of anybody that comes to you for services, which I think we need to meet people where they're at. Not everybody's the same. Everybody's response to abuse is different, and we need to meet them where they're at so that we can help them move through that.
100%. And one of the most important things that I think that I do or I get to do is that I have a group program that I offer. And it's so important to feel not alone, right? So yes, I do one-on-one coaching and that's great. And you get a lot of, but when you get in a group full of people that are like, oh, I see you. I resonate with the things that you just shared. We're growing together. There's something powerful about community. And when I opened up my community, it was amazing to see how people blossomed, even people that had been through my individual program. But when they get into a group setting where they're like, oh, that person, what? And they're doing what? It gives them permission to step more fully into self. And so that's been really fun. I just started that last November, and it has just been such a blessing to me. And that came from the events that I do, is because people were like, I can't wait another year for another event. I want to do something in between. And so that's why I created the collective. And it's been so soul filling. And I'm just so proud of how these people show up every single week. And it becomes kind of like the dopamine hit that they need to take them through the rest of the week because they fill their cup, right? We talk about filling our cup, but what we're doing is filling our cup and giving from the overflow, giving from the saucer. And that's what this group does, is it fills their cup, allows it to overflow so that they can give from the saucer the rest of the week.
And, community is essential to healing from any kinds of trauma, to transcending any kind of tragedy. We can't do it by ourselves. And I think it's also important that we encourage individuals to find communities that are going to support and validate their experiences and also support change. We talk about individuals who experience grief, and we talk about maintaining continued bonds with our loved ones. I encourage individuals, find a community that's going to support your connection with your loved one. It's going to celebrate that, it's going to validate it, and it's going to hold space for it. And it's the same, I think, with any kind of trauma. We need to find communities that are going to hold space for that and respond to that with compassion, honesty, and love.
100%. 100%.
Tell our audience more about the trauma-informed events that you facilitated. I know you've had some very dynamic speakers in the past, and I hear that was motivated by your belief in the importance of community. So how does the trauma-informed events that you do align with that whole philosophy?
Yeah, thank you. So I have to tell you the backstory of how the events got started because you'll appreciate a good faith story. So I had written my book, I had started coaching, and I went on a cruise where I was speaking. And I was on that cruise, and God just put it on my heart, like, it's time for you to step fully into this thing that I'm calling you for. And I was like, God, I am. I wrote a book. It's on Amazon. What do you mean I haven't fully stepped in? And God was like, no, it's time for you to do a live event. It's time for you to bring people into the same room. And it's time for you to teach healing. It's time for you to teach what I've walked you through. And I was like, God, I don't do events. And God was like, you do now. So, yeah. So a year later, I put on my first event here in Raleigh, and it was getting to that point of putting on the event was a learning hardball curve, one after another, because if you've never put on an event, there's a lot of moving pieces that go into putting on a live event. But by the grace of God and one miracle after another, the event, it was absolutely phenomenal. The testimonials that came out of it were way more than I could have ever have planned for. But it was a teaching moment for me of God showing me, I've brought you this far, and now it's time for you to serve in a way that brings glory to my name, but also shares what you have learned, right? Because there's no sense in me healing if I'm not going to evolve enough to serve, to teach. And so I'm in that place now where I'm like, okay, I'm ready. And so last year was my first Unbound event, and 47 people showed up, and I was like, where did these people come from? Because I was going to be happy with 5, and God was like, no, I'm going to fill your room. And so this year, when I left that event last year, God was like, get ready. Next year is going to be bigger, better, and bolder. And this year, the event's in August, and we already have double digits signed up. And I'm just like, okay, God, I have to believe, I have to trust, I have to have the confidence. And I think there's something to be said about that because people are struggling right now. There is so much heaviness. There's so much division. There's so much yuck right now in the world that people need a safe place. People need a community that will wrap their arms around them, even if it's just for 3 days, to say, I got you. Let's walk hand in hand and side by side, right? And so I'm just honored that I get to share this platform with so many powerful speakers, so many powerful workshop hosts, so many powerful healers, because I can't do any of this alone. I'm one person, but God has just continued to put people in my path that can add value to my audience, can add value to my community. And so I get to do that again this year.
Yeah, speaking from experience, I've been on the front lines of planning 3 different live events, and there's a lot of moving parts. And attention to detail is essentially going to ensure that you have a great event. And I always, as a workshop presenter in the past, I always prepared. I did my preparation as if I were going to be a workshop presenter. I would say, if I'm a workshop presenter, what do I not want to have happen? So I made sure all the details as far as audiovisual requests, rooms, times, I knew exactly where they were going, and it worked. But it's typically those small details that make great events. So, and I think the thing you mentioned about community, you're right. There's been so much division, so much polarization in the world on so many levels that it's important, I think, to have a diverse community that's not only going to embrace similarity, but also understand difference. And I think that's the key to any great community, is that we make room for both.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's an honor.
Yeah, and I read the reviews last year, the testimonials at social media, and it was fabulous. So, and I think I know a couple of the presenters that were there with you. So, and you had a really great lineup, and I'm sure you're gonna have a great lineup this year too. So,
We are. The lineup is already completed. I don't have room for new ones, and God keeps bringing more. So I'm like, okay, I'm adding you to 2027 because I know that your message needs to get out there, but this year's already full. So now I'm already starting on the 2027 lineup, which is crazy exciting to know that I get to do this again next year. So yeah, it's awesome.
yeah, I think it's pretty cool, and I wish you continued success with the Unbound platform.
Thank you so much.
You mentioned your book, Glory, Going All In, Cult Survivor to Courageous Warrior. What do you want readers to take away from reading your story?
That we're not defined by the things that we have been through or the trauma, the identities that we took on. We're not defined by those things if we choose not to be. And at the same time, we're not alone. We've all, if you have breath in your lungs, you've probably been through some hard stuff. You've probably been through some yuck. And just know that regardless of what the details are of the things that you've been through, yuck is yuck, pain is pain, trauma is trauma. And we don't have to dwell and live in that place of trauma. There is healing to be had, and it is a choice. It is a choice every day not to be defined by the things that I've been through.
Yeah, and we can transcend the things that have happened to us, but you're right, we don't have to be defined by them. It's a part of our experience, but it's not the totality of our experience.
Exactly.
Martha, you've left us with a lot of good stuff today. I have a couple more questions before we say so long for now. Um, there's one takeaway, one ultimate takeaway that you'd like to leave our listeners with today. What would that be?
One takeaway. Dave, there's so many, but I think the biggest takeaway for me is I know that trauma is lonely and it's isolating because when we're in that trauma brain, everything tells us that we're alone. Everything tells us that nobody will understand our pain. Everything tells us that's our nervous system telling us, that's our consciousness telling us, that's our wiring, right? Everything tells us that we're alone.
Yep.
And I have to tell you that is a lie. You are not alone. You are stronger than you know. I said this on a platform actually yesterday is that do you know that you've made it through every hard thing that you've ever been through and you're still here? Like, that tells me you're a badass. That tells me you're stronger than you know. So guess what? Whatever you're going through right now, you do have the ability to get through it, and you will get through it if you choose to. But staying stuck is also a choice.
Yep.
And so I just ask you to just to know and hear my heart when I say you're not alone and staying stuck is a choice. And find your people. If I'm not it, I'm always willing to walk alongside of you or join my group or any of those things. But if I'm not it, find somebody, find a group, find a community. Allowing yourself to share often opens up this part of your brain that goes, oh, well, that wasn't unsafe. I didn't die, right? But did I die? No, I didn't. And I just shared openly what I'm going through, right? And that tells your brain, okay, well, that was safe. Maybe I could try it again, right? And so it's just about re-identifying who you are after whatever it is that you're going through and trusting that you can get through it.
Well, and also understanding that there are gifts in the struggle that, regardless of what has been presented to us, people who have experienced trauma have developed skills that have gotten them to this point, but they're so busy trying to survive the trauma, they don't recognize the skills that they've developed until after they step away from it. But good or bad, and tragedy is always in service to us to help us find our higher self, even if we may not be able to see it at that particular time. Everything that's happened to us is in
Everything.
service to us. Everything.
Everything. Yeah.
So,
I say that all the time is people are like, do you wish that you hadn't been born into a cult? And I'm like, that's such a weird question to me, right? Because I can't imagine a life not being born into a cult. But everything that I have gone through and everything that I've learned from my experiences has brought me to this exact moment. And I'm so proud of the woman that I've become. And would I have become this woman without all of that? I don't know. Because all of those things and all of that healing and all of that reckoning has allowed me to step fully into the presence of Martha Glory. And I don't know if that's possible without the events.
Yeah. If I could have chosen an event other than my daughter's transition from this world to have discovered greater meaning, been able to access a better version of myself or a greater version of myself that was more compassionate, maybe more open to different perspectives, I would have chosen it. If I could have learned from somebody else's tragedy and done that, I would have gladly accepted that if my life could have remained intact. But we don't have any control over the challenges that befall us. It's how we respond to those. If you could have had the choice to be born in another family, you might have had that choice. But then again, your soul might have said, no, you need to go through this challenge for the evolution of our soul. This is the challenge that we're predestining that you work through so that you can help others in the process. And
Yes, I say that all the time. When I signed my soul contract for this human existence, I was like, give it all to me. I'm going to do it all. I'm going to evolve through it all because I ain't doing this again. Right.
No.
Like I took on a huge soul journey this go around.
Yeah. And that's why the human experience can't explain everything that our soul is destined to do. And when we finally get to that next level in the afterlife, we find out exactly what our soul purpose was, why we did what we did, and we look at it without judgment. It's just, okay, this makes sense now. I got clarity. So that might be room for another podcast down the road. So we could have a whole discussion about soul contracts. And
oh, goodness, yes.
Yeah.
That's where I like to geek out because, yeah.
Yeah, I can geek out with you with that. So, but my last question for you, this is going to give an opportunity for you to tell people how they can contact you, purchase your book, contract for your services. What's the best way for them to do that, Martha?
So we'll post the link for my link bio, which has all of my connections, whether it's social media, whether it's my website, whether it's my coaching program, that'll all be or my TV show, that'll all be in the link bio that we're going to put in the link for them. But follow me on social media. That's a great way to get to know me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or also check out my show on YouTube, the Let Glory Shine show on YouTube, which is a weekly show, comes out on Thursdays at 7 p.m. And I get to interview, like you do, Dave, I get to interview people that have walked through difficulties, challenges, trauma, and have come out on the other side and have something to share. Oftentimes are using that platform to serve, right? Because we don't evolve and we don't heal and evolve in order to just sit on it. We want to serve, we want to give back, we want to show others that there's hope. So that TV show has been a blessing to me, and it's so amazing that I get to do this. And actually, I hit a mile marker yesterday. Yesterday, I became a international TV show host because I interviewed somebody from Ghana, Africa, and it was an amazing moment of like, oh, Let Glory Shine has gone international. So that was really cool. I'm sure you remember your moment when that happened. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the first international guest I interviewed was from Canada, and it's since expanded. So, and that's a great thing about podcasting is that with the technology we have now, there's no geographic barriers. I mean, those get kind of dissolved.
Right.
But anyway, Martha, thank you so much for just a great conversation today. I truly enjoyed it. I hope we can do it again in the future. And of course, we're going to be in touch with each other and in contact with each other outside of the podcast world anyway. But thank you so much for spending time today to share your story. I know my listeners are going to be inspired.
Absolutely, Dave. And thank you for sharing your platform and everything that you do and sharing your story so vulnerably and honestly. I resonated with it the first time I heard it. And so I just want to thank you for your courage.
Oh, you're welcome. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.